What it do, YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the fourth album by rock band No Doubt. Basically, this project is called Return to Saturn, and it came out in the spring of the year 2000. Now, the thing about this particular project is this particular project came 5 years after their hit album from 1995, Tragic Kingdom, which was a big deal. That got to like the seventh or eighth single. Tragic Kingdom got to like the seventh or eighth single as far as that pitch can happen. So it was a big deal between 1995 and about 1998. They took off 1999 and came back with this particular album in early 2000. So it's a pretty good pitch, just a bunch of No Doubt. Particularly Tragic Kingdom. Particularly Tragic Kingdom was seen as like a classic 90s album as far as that pitch. Definitely a seminal album out of the 90s as far as that particular kind of happens with it. I mean, obviously getting to the seventh or eighth single is a pretty big deal, especially around that particular time. It was just an album that lasted year after year just within that pitch of promotion cycle as far as that kind of went with it. Had hits on there like Just a Girl, Spider Webs, um, Don't Speak, some of those particular type ones. It had plenty of good hits on there, just a good particular pitch to kind of get that sort of stuff. It was a pretty good concept. I reviewed that album back in July, so it's a good pitch to kind of get that. But I wanted to see what the follow up album was like. I did review the Greatest Hits No Doubt album also last July as far as that pitch can happen. The singles 1992 to 2003. So I at least know about the four singles from this particular album already. But I just would have to say, I think last time I want to say I didn't recommend the song New, but now I basically recommend that song. So I recommend all four of the singles on this particular album. It's a pretty good pitch to get that in particular. Just what I have to say about this particular project. And this is actually a pretty heralded project. Now, there were some folks that said, critics kind of said and such that it didn't stack up to Tragic Kingdom in terms of the massive type appeal. But that's just with any particular album. When you get an album that gets like the seventh or eighth single, just a massive kind of seminal album, especially out of a decade highlight as far as that particular pitch kind of happens, it's difficult to kind of follow up that. It can be difficult at times to follow up a particular massive album with such appeal as far as that pitch can happen. And I think if they had 7 or 8 singles on this particular album, we probably wouldn't have seen No Doubt again until like 2005 or 2006. They probably would have taken like another 5 or 6 years off, something that relative pitch, but they did. This album had 4 singles, which is still pretty good, pretty massive amount to kind of get within that concept, especially that they had been around throughout the 90s and early 2000s as far as that pitch album. So they had some good stuff here. They followed up this particular album with another hit album, which was called Rocksteady, that came out in late 2001. That was a little bit more pop and mainstream type appeal as far as that pitch can happen, with songs like Hella Good and some of those type ones and Underneath It All. But this particular album just has some good stuff on here. It's a lot more of a personal album, I'd have to say. This the concept of this particular project, Return to Saturn, is a lot more personable, a lot more rosy, a lot more romantic, just within that relative pitch. Just a lot more kind of steadfast and homebound as far as that pitch can happen. I mean, there's definitely some outing songs on here, but it's just more in kind of like a Date Come Pride. It's just kind of been like a more date and insular kind of compression as far as that pitch can happen with it. So it's definitely a very romantic type of album, but I do like the concept of it. It's just some good type of appeal for like restaurant. It's just some good type of appeal for like restaurant type music and just shopping mall type music and out and about. This overall kind of rosy, preoccupied type feels as far as that pitch kind of goes along with it. A little bit different from Tragic Kingdom. Tragic Kingdom was a little bit more loosened up, a little bit more boisterous, stuff like that. Had some summer aspects on this particular. Tragic Kingdom had some summer aspects about it in particular, songs like Just a Girl and some of those type pitches. But this is a lot more insular, I'd have to say. It's just the concept about it. But we'll go ahead and talk about the singles here just to get towards some of this. This is a pretty good album. I do feel like I want to say that I gave Tragic Kingdom a pretty high score, like an 8, at least an 8, 8.5 out of 10, something around that particular neighborhood, I'd have to say. But this album's a little bit like maybe a shade or two weaker than Tragic Kingdom, but it's not a bad album. It's definitely going to get a pretty relatively high score, I'd have to say. So we'll go ahead and talk about the 4 singles here. So the first single was New, and this is a pretty nice one. This is like a jazzy kind of quick cruise up tempo breeze of a song, I'd have to say. It's like an out on the town kind of pizzazz that this song kind of feels like, I would have to say. And this is just some in motion thrills, I would definitely feel like. And this song is just a bop. This is definitely a pretty nice one. Definitely reminds me, this is definitely just like some speed and kind of highway type music, just out and about kind of bustle as far as that pitch can happen. This can kind of be, I forgot what I was going to say here. This is kind of a rosy type tune, I would have to say, in particular, kind of a cruise out type song. But I just look after it, it's just kind of the concept. I mean, that's what I was going to say. This can kind of be like a workshift type tune, but it's very much the bustle of this quick paced romantic type fare, I would have to say in particular about that particular one. So it's a pretty jazzy type one to kind of get for like some quick paced cruising as far as that kind of goes along with it. Good stuff. Like I was saying, I don't think I recommended New when I first heard the song on the 1992-2003 singles album, I would have to suppose in particular, but I do like this song particularly now. I like all 4 of the singles, some good concepts there. So Ex-Girlfriend is the second single. This is a good highlighted one. This is like a hazy kind of evening, slower dance tune, I would have to say in particular. This is just a rosy kind of steadfast social outing of a song, I would have to say. And this song just gives off like a smoky kind of vibe. So I do particularly like this one. Definitely some good restaurant type music, I would have to say in particular. It just works within that pitch, but it's also like a pretty good dance type tune, just a slow dance type aspect of something. It's kind of a more sultry type song in particular, I'd have to say. When you get some of these type songs that typically in the dance club, especially in like the late 90s, early 2000s, you'd have something more techno or Euro pop, something like that. But this is just a good concept to kind of get some slow dance type tunes. Definitely could use another song like this on the particular album that just has the same sort of pitch for like a dance club song, but not necessarily like a fast-paced, frenetic type one. This works pretty well for that sort of sense. This real romantic type one. Simple Kind of Life is a pretty good highlight. This is definitely like a dark, gnarled sequel to Don't Speak off of Tragic Kingdom, I would have to say in particular. This has the same sort of vibe and overall pitch as that particular one, just a little bit more malaise about it. This is like a malaise kind of evening workshift gem, I would have to say. So this one is the most successful single off the album in terms of the chart appeal that it had, just within the aspect of how it charted back in the year 2000, I'd have to say. Wasn't quite as much of a smash as Don't Speak was back in 1995, 1996, but still a pretty nice one to kind of get in particular. Just did a lot of good concepts as far as that particular pitch kind of happens. Restores no doubt to like their former glory of like the 90s as far as that pitch kind of happens. It's kind of, I mean, it's a good cousin of like Don't Speak, I would have to say. It's just a good concept to kind of get those. It's a good 1-2 punch, the same sort of format, maybe not as affable and full blown catchy and its overall earworm as far as that particular song, but still would I say it's a pretty good one. You can do a lot worse than listen to this song. It's not a bad song whatsoever. It's just kind of the concept of just saying it just is like just a mildly lesser cousin of Don't Speak, but it's still a pretty good highlight type one. Definitely some good evening work shift. Definitely some good malaise evening work shift to kind of get here. Bathwater is the fourth single. This is a pretty nice one. This is like a rosy kind of date evening jazz of a song, I'd have to say. It's like a back and forth kind of commotion about this particular song, I'd have to say. And this is just a good restaurant out kind of single, I'd have to say in particular. So this one goes good with Ex-Girlfriend. These are both some rosy, sultry type ones to kind of get in particular. It's kind of like the smoky vibes of these particular type ones. That's really the thing about this particular album is songs like Bathwater, Ex-Girlfriend, some of these type ones, just a lot more of like a romantic kind of connotation as far as that pitch can go. It's a pretty good concept to get some of these. It's definitely more preoccupied type album as far as that pitch can go. It's not quite as frivolous and quite as fleeting as far as that particular kind of goes along with it, but it's just kind of a little bit more insular, a little bit more undivided attention type concept as far as that aspect kind of goes. But it's just kind of the concept of just getting some of these, just some good date night evening type pitch as far as some of these kind of happen. Just restaurant music that just works pretty well. So basically, there's 14 songs on this particular album. There's actually 15, but one of which is the Too Late instrumental, which I'm not going to count. I didn't necessarily recommend the song Too Late either. It's kind of the concept about it, but so I just would have to say out of 14 songs in this particular album, I wound up recommending to you 9. So that's a pretty good pitch, just a little bit over half the album. It's pretty good. I mean, it's a relatively solid particular project to kind of get this. It's definitely good, above average, I would have to say in particular. Just a few minor duds on here that just kind of kept it from being like a full-blown classic, but it's pretty, I mean, I would have to say, minus the fact that it doesn't have like 5, 6, 7, 8 singles like Tragic Kingdom, still does a pretty excellent job. I mean, all 4 of the singles are excellent. There are some other album cuts on here to kind of get a little bit insular. Definitely could have used another song like Ex-Girlfriend, something like that. Definitely could have used another song like Simple Kind of Life, some of those type pitches. But there are some other highlights on here that we'll get to that I probably could have used. Probably could have used another song like New as well. But yeah, out of 14 songs in this particular album, I wound up recommending to you 9. So that's kind of the concept about it. So there's 5 songs I didn't recommend, but so go ahead and talk about some of these. Like a pretty nice song on here would be Magic's in the Makeup. Did like this one. This is like a malaise but sparkly song, I'd have to say. This is pretty similar to Underneath It All off their Rocksteady album from 2001. And I would say that this song definitely stretches. So this is kind of one of those reggaeton type songs. This is like the reggaeton song off the album that No Doubt is typically known for doing on their albums as far as that pitch kind of happens. I want to say that they had a single that was in that particular fashion off of Tragic Kingdom that was like a charting single as far as that particular pitch kind of happens with it. But I would have to say this is a pretty nice reggaeton type one to kind of get. Just the same typical kind of vibes that just works pretty well with it. Just kind of a malaise type one, but I would definitely have to say in particular it's just a pretty nice highlight type one. I'm glad that No Doubt is able to pull off these reggaeton type songs. Even the one Sparkle off of their 2012 album Push and Shove is pretty good concepts. All of these reggaeton type songs usually work pretty well and heavily, I'd have to say in particular. This is another good example of that. Just a real stretching type one to kind of get for like some summer type. It's a real good stretching type one to kind of get for some summer type malaise, but this is pretty good. And this is sometimes these reggaeton type songs by No Doubt kind of have like a bittersweet type feel. This is one that has a more bittersweet type feel. Underneath It All was kind of one that was kind of a little bit more of like a kind of more feel good type one, but the Sparkle from Push and Shove was kind of more of like a bittersweet type one. This one's kind of like a bittersweet type one, I suppose, in particular. It's this kind of concept, but I do like that song. Artificial Sweetener's a pretty nice one, I would have to say. It's like a hazy kind of late day work shift of a song, I'd have to say in particular. This song has like a post grunge feel about it, and this is just like a typical kind of alternative rock type hit or alternative metal, I would have to say. It's a pretty good concept for that. Definitely reminds me of something that like Trapped or Blink 182, one of those type bands would do in particular, I would have to say. Just something that sounds ripped out of 2002, 2003. Some of those kind of Nickelback, even some of those type folks from like the early 2000s, kind of like almost like a page turner of a song, I'd have to say, because I don't know how full blown post grunge was kind of out in like 99, 2000 as far as that pitch kind of an early bird type song within that relative pitch before like Puddle of Mud and Nickelback and some of those type folks from like 2001 really started to blow up as far as that pitch count. It's just kind of an interesting type one to get. It almost kind of feels like a new metal type song also just within that relative pitch, but I do like this one. Definitely has some great riffage on this particular song. It's a real malaise and hazy type one that just works pretty well within that aspect, I'd have to say. Marry Me is a pretty good highlighted one. I would say this is like a good companion to Bathwater, I would have to say in particular. It's like a steady kind of vanilla restaurant type music of a song, I'd have to say, and this is just kind of like a smoky kind of outing song. So it's definitely a good concept for some more restaurant type music. Definitely feel like some songs like Bathwater, Ex-Girlfriend, Marry Me, and just kind of I definitely feel like some songs like Bathwater, Ex-Girlfriend, and Marry Me are all some rosy type ones to kind of get within that aspect. It's a real sultry and romantic type feel as far as that pitch kind of goes along with it. Just some good kind of composed and just overall relatively civil, but just kind of in like a smoky type sense. Just a real graceful type outing as far as that pitch kind of goes along with it. Just for some steadfast type fare, just for like some romantic nights out as far as that pitch kind of goes. Just some good concepts. I do like the concept of some of this restaurant type music because it's not always the albums, especially not all rock bands make like restaurant music. The only real other rock band that I can think that's made relative restaurant music would just be Smash Mouth, but that's kind of more in like a more recreational type fare. This is a little bit more romanticized, but I still say it's a pretty good concept. So that's a nice one. Comforting Lies, pretty good highlight type one. Also, this is like a dramatic kind of tensive dance club jive of a song I had to say in particular. This one reminds me of Panic at the Disco, probably about 5 or 6 years before they blew up, just within that relative pitch. And this is just some good social fun. So it's definitely kind of a dramatic, kind of just more. This is almost kind of a more Baroque rock type pitch as far as that particularly goes along with it. Just some good job to kind of get in particular. Just a real tensive type one and drama type feel type one just within that relative pitch. Just good aspect to kind of get this particular one. Once again, this could probably be some restaurant type music I'd have to say in particular. Just some good outing type fare, decent dance club type hit. Same concept with like Ex-Girlfriend's pretty good pitch to kind of get that one just within the concept of it. This is one of the few type songs on here that has like some full-blown kind of jive about it just within that particular sense. Definitely need another song like this one. I would have to say it would have been a good concept to have gotten some more ones like this. Ex-Girlfriend, Comforting Liar, some good highlights for that sort of pitch. Just a little bit more outing type jive where you're a little bit more in motion, a little bit more frivolous just within that aspect that has supposed to be a good concept. And then Home Now is a pretty nice one as well. It's like a smoky kind of day after hours wind down of a song I'd have to say in particular. It's like a residential kind of marinate type gem, I'd say. Some kickback at the crib as far as that particularly kind of happens. And this is just kind of like a wine and dine kind of hit. So it's definitely another romantic type one. Just the after effect after like some date night tunes like Bathwater, Ex-Girlfriend, and Marry Me. This would be a good concept of just like the last few minutes of the car ride home and the opening moments of being at the crib. Some of those type pitches, just the candlelight type stuff and pitches like that. Wine and dine type jam, Netflix, some of those type pitches as far as that particular aspect kind of goes along with it. Just a romanticized type one that works pretty damn well, I'd have to say. It's just a good concept for that. So yeah, just look after this particular album. It had some highlights on here, I would have to say. So just in a different pitch, just kind of, it really reminds me of just like evening type music, just day after hours. A little bit of makeshift on here, not as much, not tons of songs like Simple Kind of Life and some of those type pitches. Just really kind of more focused on like just really more focused on like the sultry kind of romantic kind of evening after hours, just between like I would say 5:30, 6 o'clock p.m. to about 9:30, 10 p.m. something like that. There's not really a ton of nightclub songs on this particular album, but it just has like the evening kind of life more down pat with this particular project. Just a good concept to get some of these. Tragic Kingdom was a little bit more summery. Rocksteady was a little bit more nightlife and glitzy, I'd have to say, but this one's just kind of more just the kind of day after hours type pitch with a little bit of work shift thrown in mild senses, I'd have to say. So that's the concept. But to talk about some of these songs I don't recommend on here, basically 6 Feet Under was just a poor type song. I'm trying to do like an up tempo type number, kind of like New, but just a worse version of that. There's another song like that that's kind of on here that's not as good either, I'd have to say. I think it's like Staring Problem. That's kind of another poor one that tries to be some up-tempo type one. The unfortunate thing about this particular is No Doubt has some up-tempo type numbers on here that just don't really work that well in this particular project. I feel like these songs just particularly lack focus compared to some of these moments just with like the evening, compared to some of these songs with like the evening romance and workshift type haze, as far as that kind of goes along with it. So that would be 6 Feet Under and then Staring Problem, both of which the Staring Problem song has a pretty bad hook on there. It's just a real kind of, this Staring Problem is just a real dud of a song. I'd have to say just was really one that didn't really work that well as far as that pitch kind of went along with it. Suspension Without Suspense was kind of a poor type one. Also, this was kind of a ballad type one that just didn't pull out the vibes. This is like a typical kind of jury type ballad that just was kind of for like wailing and just kind of bemoaning as far as that pitch can happen. Just not a good example of that. Too Late was just kind of a defeated kind of date afternoon type tune as far as that pitch can happen with it. Just kind of a malaise type one. Just didn't have the good pitch as far as that particular concept went along with it. Just kind of a malaise, kind of just out and about and like shopping mall type music and just standard day activity as far as that pitch can happen. But just didn't really appreciate that one as much. And then Dark Blue was just kind of a poor type one. This one was trying to be like another variation of like the same pitch that Home Now was kind of being, but just didn't pull out the vibe quite as well. This one's a little bit more electronica type fused as far as that pitch going along with it, but it just didn't have the same affability, I'd have to say. So that's kind of the concept. But so me recommending 9 songs out of 14 on this particular album, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 7.75 out of 10. Some good concepts on here. It's just a pretty steadfast and just overall focused type album, just within a personal and kind of insular sense, just in a romantic type tone as far as that particular pitch kind of goes along with it. Plenty of good date night and restaurant type music as far as that particular pitch kind of goes along with it. It's pretty insular to stuff like that, just kind of focused, just kind of about like the commotion, just like workaday type tone, just within a romantic type sense. Kind of a blue collar type album, but just within the aspect, just kind of more focused just on like this kind of more focused on everyday life and romance type appeal, I suppose, in particular. So that's kind of the concept about it. You know, I feel like Tragic Kingdom was a little bit different. Like I said, that was a lot more boisterous and just kind of more flabbergasting of an album in particular. I'd have to say just a little bit more widespread. It had a lot more just kind of spastic kind of appeal about it, just a little bit more out and about and just things like that. And then I would also feel like Rocksteady from 2001 just kind of had a lot more glitz and electronic type fare as far as that pitch kind of went along with it. Just some stuff for just like this kind of, I mean, I don't remember that album as full blown, but I do at least remember in the singles that it just had a lot more nightclub type appeal and just a lot more just kind of boisterousness. But this kind of feel, this is like, this is definitely kind of a romance and Bay and Boo type album, just in particular. I'd have to suppose in particular some good stuff to kind of get just within that relative kind of summer type fare. I mean, this is definitely more warm weather type music, kind of similar to like Tragic Kingdom, some of those type pitches. But I just look after it, just the concept that it's just a little bit more preoccupied, a little bit more focused and stuff on your mind, just a little bit more undivided attention, like I was saying before. So then that relative concept of disc, really not that focused on workshift, not really that focused on steadfast kind of blue collar type fare. I mean, it's blue collar, but it's just kind of in the concept of more your personal life as far as that pitch kind of goes along with this. That's the concept. 7.75. Do you like the concept? There's some personal songs on here, just not quite as frivolous. It doesn't really have a song like Just a Girl, something like that, like a nightclub type song, a dance club type song like Hella Good, some of those type pitches, just some of that kind of aspects. But I would have to say still some good stuff. The social score, that's kind of tricky. I think I'll give the social score probably like, I think I'll give the social score like a 7 out of 10, because I feel like there is some appeal about this particular album, but it's just not quite as focused on like stepping out and kind of having like a boisterous kind of Friday night, Saturday night, some of those type pitches. I mean, there's songs on here, like there are a few minor songs on here for stepping out, like Ex-Girlfriend and Comforting Line, some of those type ones, and a few extra songs that I didn't recommend, like 6 Feet Under and Staring Problem, some of those type pitches. But I would have to say for the most part, like I said, this is a romantic type album. I definitely recommend it in that particular fashion, just for restaurant type music, just outing, wine and dine type music, just in that relative pitch. But it's just not quite as boisterous of like a weekend album, like that full blown kind of appeal. So it gets a natch in like a minor sense, but still it is social in like a romantic sense. It's being able to have that particular concept. So there's some good stuff there. So that's the concept. So in terms of the future, like No Doubt has not put out an album since 2012, and it seems like they've broken up and they're probably not coming back within that relative sense. They did just perform at Coachella 2024, so that's a good concept about that. I know they have there's at least a couple more albums that I want to get to within that relative pitch, so I am going to get to some more of these. Their 1995, their other 1995 album, then their 1992 album. I'm going to get to these and get them more reviewed up. Then there's also one more Gwen Stefani album I have to get to, so there are some ones to get to, but this is definitely pretty highlighted type one here. Has some great stuff on here, and I do recommend it, but it's minorly haphazard, but it's minorly haphazard, but for the most part it is a good above average kind of album.